We are back with the second part of our Leagues of Votann diorama.
In our previous video, we built a wicked little base in the spirit of an underground forge with lava streaming through the floor tiles. And if you haven't watched this video already and want to see how we build it from scratch, we'll have a link in the description.
In this second video, I am going to paint the Hearthkyn warrior that will stand at the top of the base. And for this model, I am going to use techniques like OSL and freehand for all the symbols, because this is what you do when you really want to show off.
You mean when you don't have the proper decals?
Yep, that too. I started by priming the miniature with a Valero Ghost Grey surface primer, followed by a mix of Valero Red and medium yellow to build an orange base coat. I am using orange rather than red to make it easier to build the OSL over the part illuminated by the lava, adding more yellow to the mix for a brighter orange coat sprayed upward. As the scene is located inside a forge devoid of sunlight, the top of the model should be darker, and for this I am using purple ink mixed with red and sprayed from above to keep a rich color. I am then using the same Valero medium yellow to spray a transparent coat wherever the OSL effect will be the strongest, followed by a last coat of orange to blend everything together. I am making sure to not cover too much of the darker areas. Alright, brush time, starting with a coat of German grey over the clothing. As you will see here, I first wanted to keep some of the base color showing through the clothing, but this was a waste of time. And because I prepared this model like a pig and left a few mold lines, I am using the back of a hobby knife to smooth the ones that are the most visible, like here, right in the middle of the boots. I can then proceed to paint them using the same German grey. Same for the weapon and the visor. A second darker coat over those elements and the articulation parts of the armor in Valero black. I made a purple glaze using the same ink and applied it to the top of the armor. Once dry, it will give a nice hue to the darker red. Next, the groundwork for highlighting the armor, with Valero Red for a rough edge, highlight and glazing. The orange is pretty terrible for brushwork because of its consistency, but as it is transparent, it works really well for glazing once it is seen down. I am using the same purple glaze as before to darken a few parts of the armor, like here on the helmet or the various recesses. To continue with edge highlighting, I used Evo Sun Scarlet. And unlike with the previous steps, I am making those edges thin and clean, switching between the tip and the side of the brush. I am also using that same color as a glaze to brighten up some of the armor covering the tights. Next, I am mixing a few drops of sun and medium yellows to Evo Sun Scarlet to build up the OSL effect on the higher parts of the armor, like the shoulder pads and the backpack. This is still quite subtle, but it will get brighter later on. Then, adding a little bit of white to my mix, I am brightening those edges.
And yes, the Leagues of Votann are offering twice the fun with their beveled shoulder pads. How thoughtful!
I am using a mix of medium yellow, white and a hint of red to highlight the lower part of the armor, both for the edges and the panels where the OSL will be the strongest. In case you haven't noticed, I airbrushed another coat of red and medium yellow over the model to break some of the orange hue that was a little too dominant. Wait, is that a green glow on the weapon? I'll get back to that. I am also adding the same highlights to the parts that are illuminated by the Ymir conglomerate symbol that sits at the back of the diorama. Those air model paints are very transparent, and as you can see, they are making the process slower than it should be. And by the time we are editing this video, we actually ordered and received a selection of AK Interactive 3rd Gen paints that will allow us to pass beyond the limitations of what we are working with at the moment.
Because as much as we want to use what we have, we certainly don't want to lose what's left of our sanity.
Not much. But anyway, you should be able to work with what you have available, no matter how painful this is. Using glazing, I am again brightening the parts most illuminated by the lava, making sure to keep a smooth blend. Layer by layer, I am slowly getting where I want the color to be, finishing with pure medium yellow for the hottest point. A bit of red glazing to smooth out the transitions, and we pass on to the clothing with Insignia and RLM Blue, starting with Insignia Blue as a base coat. I am then brightening it to prepare for the OSL effect, progressively adding blue RLM to the mix layer by layer and pushing the brightest pigments toward where the light will be the most intense. Okay, time to fix that red overspray and paint everything that should be some kind of dark metal, like the weapon or part of the backpack. Those small rivets could have stayed red, but I wanted to try something more contrasting. I then applied a black wash in most of the recesses on the armor to add contrast and separation, making sure to avoid flat surfaces and quickly swiping anywhere I might have spilled over. Here, I started to brighten up some of the metallic parts, progressively adding blue RLM and white to the mix. With a mix of sandy brown and burnt umber, I painted two thin base coats over all the leathery elements. While the leather parts are drying up, let's give some love to that lovely grenade with a dark green mixed with some blue RLM, highlighting some of the raised parts by adding a bit of Escarpena green to the mix. Next, I went back to further highlight the various metallic parts. This is a low effort NMM, as those parts don't need to catch much attention and metallic paint can also look a little weird once you add an OSL over them. Back to the leather with a mix of sandy brown and middle stone. Applying this mix over the leather while keeping the dark brown in the recesses and shadows. I am using a higher mix of sandy stone to glaze over the areas that are most exposed to the light. Mixing sandy stone with a bit of white, I then proceed to edge highlight the leather. A few brighter highlights on the metal parts here on the grenade and on the backpack using pale grey blue and white. This model has a torchlight on its torso that illuminates the back of the weapon with a green glow that bounces back and illuminates some of the armor. I am using a mix of glazing and edge highlights with Escarpena green over the armor, adding a bit of white over the brightest edges. For the weapon and other metallic elements, I am building the foundation of the OSL by wet blending pale grey blue with German grey. All those details are illuminated from the bottom with a bright grey highlight. I am doing the same on the armor, clothing and boots. This is begging for extra details. A black glaze neatly blended to make the top of the clothing darker, and on-to-edge highlights on the visor with German grey. Back to the weapon with a bright grey highlight, again making sure that all those edges get brighter the closer they are to the light. Next, I am brightening the leather even more with a sandy brown and white glaze. It is very important to let those layers dry completely before adding any more paints, and so I switched to other parts like the pistol in the holster. With the black wash in the recesses, I'm again adding more depth to various parts of the armor. I am painting the glass of the visor with dark green and mixing it to Escopena green to have it match the color of the torchlight. As you can see, I am slowly and progressively building the OSL effect layer by layer and making sure that I don't go a little too far. Alright, this is getting better. On to the red armor with edge highlights and scratches using a mix of Valero Air Red and Evo Sun Scarlet. I would say that this feels similar to working on a Space Marine armor, except on a much more contracted and compact form. I am adding highlights to the glass with Escopena green and white, and a mix of Insignia blue and blue RLM to highlight the visor. Back to the leather with a mix of white and sandy brown to brighten even more some of the lower edges. At this stage, it is about refining those edge highlights on the armor with a mix of red, Evo Sun Scarlet and white. If you love painting edge highlights, then the Leagues of Votann is the army for you, because those models, they are chock full of them. And if you don't, you can still find a more efficient painting style and stay away from heavy metal. I am using a brown wash made with burnt umber to blend the texture on the leather. I'm adding a few more hot points on various highlights. Layer by layer, I am pushing brighter pigments to where the armor is the most illuminated by the lava, using a mix of medium yellow and white for the brightest edges. You really can keep on refining forever, but as much as we sometimes want to achieve an amazing effect, time is finite, and there is a moment where we need to say stop and pass on to something else. I start by roughly tracing the design with a pencil, before switching to a size 1 Kolinsky Series 7 brush to paint it with pale blue-gray. I wanted to show you why using such a small brush is often much harder to control than a larger one. I actually made a small mistake here with the design and had to correct it, which is way easier and safer if you varnish your model before starting freehand. I am using the same base color to refine those lines because it is often much easier to build these kind of small details from the outside. For the rest of the freehand, I am switching to a 00 Kolinsky Series 35 brush, which has a much longer and larger body. Those longer bristles are giving you better brush control on long lines and are also holding more paint. I'm adding here a simple squad marking. One down, onto the next one. This brush has more bounce to it, which means that the bristles are better at keeping their shape. Having to repeat the same design several times is good practice, and my brush control and technique is improving with each iteration. Now, the Emir conglomerate symbol, which is a tricky one with its tiny elements. I'm trying to keep it clean, but I don't want to spend too much time on this either. tiny little elements. Yep, this looks good enough for me, and nobody's going to look at it with a magnifying glass anyway. Now, let's tint those freehand symbols to make them look a bit more gold. I'm using Valero Middlestone, which I am applying as a glaze over the brightest part of the design. Far from perfect, but that's okay. I'm leaving some of the bright gray visible as if those symbols were reflecting a bit of the ambient light. As the paint is reduced to a glaze, I don't have to be overly precise. I am then mixing the same Middlestone color to a bit of white to paint over the brightest parts. A bit of touch-up using the same base color as the armor. Time for a bit of OSL fun, like here on the leather, where I am glazing with medium yellow. OSL, or Object Source Lighting, if you didn't know, refers to a technique where the light illuminating your model is painted as coming from another object in the scene. You can really have a lot of fun with this technique, from the simplest glow around the lenses of a Space Marine helmet to a stream of lava illuminating the bottom of a model. Adding an OSL to a place that you wouldn't even notice at first sight is either a total waste of time or a fun Easter egg that keeps on giving to the curious observer. I am manually painting some of the illumination, but all these will nicely blend together at the very end by going over with the airbrush. I wasn't sure how to paint the keypad, but in the end I went for simple grey keys and a bit of highlight on screen. Okay, I had 2 freehand symbols left to paint on the weapon, but at this stage I had little patience left, to be honest. This is not the state of mind that you want when painting freehand, and you'll see that I'm relying a lot more on outlining the design to fix my mistakes. I am using German grey to shrink those lines and make them easier to read. This is also the occasion to fix this symbol that is a little off because of rushing it. It would have been so much easier to take my time and not have to spend it fixing the symbol. Again, with Middlestone, I am glazing over the symbol. Nice! There's nothing like painting a freehand over a hard-to-reach surface. Well, what about a surface that also has an OSL effect on it? Reaching with my brush to paint this symbol definitely wasn't the easiest, and really I should revise some of my life choices. The last parts of the model that need to be illuminated are the boots and those metal elements on the legs. To blend everything nicely together and reinforce the OSL effect, I airbrush some medium yellow from the bottom. And with that, this diorama is complete.
That you enjoyed how this project turned out.
And we're looking forward to bring you more creative videos.
Take care and we'll see you
In the next video.
in the next video.
See ya.
Bye!